Hi everybody, this is Jane from Rockin' Worms located in Loxahatchee, Florida. Tonight's video is going to be about my red wigglers, and it's going to help you decide how to start your red wigglers. One of the first decisions you have to make after you decide to buy red wigglers is, what are you going to keep them in? So fortunately, there's a lot of information on the internet on how to keep your red wiggler worms. So some options are a 5-gallon bucket. Some are a flat plastic bin. Another option is a big tote, or perhaps even a small plastic shoebox. The question is, how do you decide which container to use when you're starting out? Well, let's use me as an example. I didn't know very much about red wigglers, except I knew I wanted to give it a try. So I had gone to my friend Rob, who had some worms, and said, hey buddy, can you give me a handful of worms? And he did. So I went online and I heard about using 5-gallon buckets. Let me just move these out of the way for just a moment here. Okay, so I knew I wanted to use a 5-gallon bucket. I wanted to use it because I like to use things that I already have, that are inexpensive, that are reusing, recycling items that I come across. Okay, so I already had a 5-gallon bucket. All right, so 5-gallon bucket, and I need bedding. Well, here is a bag of shred that fits into the 5-gallon bucket. I already measured it, so I know what's going to happen, but you can see that is quite a bit of bedding. So let's dump it in so you can see that it fits. Okay, there we go. So here's 5 gallons of shredded cardboard. Now this isn't real bedding. I'm not going to put my worms into it, but this could become real bedding by adding a lot of moisture to it. So once you add moisture to it, it's actually going to compress, with the water, and you would actually have even more physical bedding in here. But let's use this as an example. So now I have my bedding in here. This is what I had, 5-gallon bucket full of bedding, except mine was damp and ready to go. And I had 100 worms, approximately from my friend Rob. So what I did is I went to one of my bins and I picked out literally 100 worms. So let me flip these guys because they've all gone down to the bottom to avoid the light so you can see them. Here they are. Okay, so here is 100 red wigglers, different sizes, different ages. I got some babies in there. I've got some breeder adults in there. Pretty much a mix. Now, then I took my 100 red wigglers and I put them in the bedding. Again, I'm not going to put them in the bedding because this is not hospitable to them. But what I want you to see is how few worms that is compared to the vast amount of bedding that is in this 5-gallon bucket. But you say, okay, what's the problem, Jane? So there's a lot of bedding and a little bit of worms, no big deal. Yes, but, okay, what happens is, or what happened to me, is after about 3-4 days, I went in to check on the status of my worms in this big bucket. And I start digging around through the moist bedding, which is also dark and damp. And I'm searching and I'm not finding any worms. And I'm searching and I'm searching and I'm digging. I'm up to my elbow in the bucket. I'm not finding any worms. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, all those worms have vacated. They're somewhere in my house. Where are these worms? Or, oh my gosh, even worse, they all died and they're decomposing in there. Disaster. I was kind of upset, to be frank. So what I ended up doing is going back to my friend Rob and confessing that I probably killed those worms he gave me. He said, relax, I'll give you another handful of worms. So he did. He gave me approximately the same amount of worms. So I went home and I was like, let's give this another go. My bedding still looked fine as far as I knew, and I put another handful of worms into the bedding. And I gave it another 3 or 4 days before I went and checked. So I go in 3 or 4 days later and I start digging through the bin. And thankfully, I start coming across a worm here and a worm there and another worm there. And I'm like, oh, at least they're alive. They're in there. I'm not finding a lot. I'm not very happy. And I'm a little discouraged because I think I'm doing something wrong. Why aren't my worms easy to find? Like all those videos online where they show all these worms. Well, that was actually the answer. Those videos showed bins with a lot of worms. I didn't have a lot of worms. I had a modest start and I had them in a big container. So I started thinking, I am doing something not wrong, but maybe not the best. So I started doing some additional reading and research, and I actually came across this tip that I'm going to share with you now. There is a calculation that has been determined by researchers and people with a lot more experience than me that comes down to this. 100 worms is best situated in 1 gallon of bedding. Alternatively, 200 worms are best situated in a foot square amount of bedding, which is 12 inches by 12 inches. So 200 worms in a square foot of bedding, or 100 worms in 1 gallon of bedding. Now, if you're buying 500 worms, you just do the calculation. 500 worms, you need 5 gallons of bedding, or 2.5 square feet of space for your worms. So that's all you have to do. Just do a simple calculation. Now you're saying, oh, I'm buying a pound of worms. How does that help me? Well, a pound of worms is conventionally determined to be approximately 1,000 worms, give or take a little bit, okay? So you say 1,000 worms, that is 10 times 100, so you need 10 gallons of bedding. So then you go to your, I'm gonna put that down, you go to your various containers and you find what container comfortably holds 10 gallons of bedding, and that's the one you use. Very straightforward. So let's put this in practical use. I bought last Friday 100 worms from V at the gardenandwormlady.com website. She has a lot of videos on YouTube regarding her worm journey. She's been doing it for over 20 years. I totally suggest you check her out. She's got a lot of great information. I've learned a lot from her as well. So let me get the worms I bought from V on Friday. I did a video on Friday with the unboxing, so check that out as well if you would like. And I put them in a shoebox, okay? I didn't explain at the time why I chose the shoebox, but now I'm going to explain that. Here is a identical shoebox, right? So, what is it? 100 worms for 1 gallon of bedding. So here is approximately, I'm going to sit down for a minute here. Here is approximately 1 gallon of bedding. Yes, it's a little short, but you get the general idea. And again, I used a gallon jug that I already had at home that was destined for the garbage, cut off the top, and I'm now using it as a measuring cup, so to speak. So approximately 1 gallon, pour it into the shoebox. And you can see that it fits pretty good. I've got room to work around, and 100 worms. You can see how they can disperse into this amount of bedding and have plenty of room to do their little wormy thing. They are close enough together that they can find food that I put in the middle or either end. They're close enough to each other that they can find a friend, and everybody can be happy. And when I go looking for them, I can find them. So let's actually do that now. I'm just gonna put them over here so they're not in the light. Again, these are the worms that I bought from V in the shoebox I used. I'm going to take off the plastic cover that helps keep in moisture. I live in Florida, and even though it's March 1st, there are a lot of days already where I had to put the air conditioner on to keep it from being too hot in the house for my comfort. But having the air conditioner on does suck moisture out of the air, so I need to provide a little moisture barrier to keep the worms moist. The newspaper covering, by the way, helps keep it dark for the worms. All right, so here are the worms. I'm going to start digging through, and let's see if we can find some. There they are. And you know what? I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see better myself. Okay, here we go. So here I'm starting to find worms. They're all in here, and I'm going to kind of dig down and flip over, and here's some more worms. Now remember, there are 100 worms in here, so there's a fair few for the size and the space, but there's not so many that they're all jammed in together. Jamming your worms in together is not healthy for them either. So the other thing I'm looking for as I'm digging through, here's some more, is do they look healthy? Do they have some size to them? They were chunky when they came to me because V sells chunky worms, and they still seem to be pretty chunky. So that to me indicates that they're happy and healthy, and they are eating, even though I have not yet put in any prepared food. My bedding, I pre-compost my bedding, so there's a lot of biota bacteria in here for them to eat right from the word go. But now that I see that they seem to be doing fine, and I can see that the bedding is still moist, it easily compresses together, but breaks apart easily, so it's not too dry, it's not too wet. I am going to give them a little feed. What are these two doing? Seeing if I have a mating pair. Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay, so I'm going to give them a small feed right now of my worm chow so they can start to get used to a new food, okay? V did send generously a small packet of her worm food in with the worms. I did not feed them that. I will at some point to use it because I'm sure it's delicious and nutritious for them, but I want to get them started, acclimated to the food that I'm going to provide to them on an ongoing basis. So let me get my worm chow, which is located up here on my shelf, and I'm bringing down my tote, and this container is my worm chow. Okay, I make it at home. And at some point in the future, I'll share with you what the recipe is. But what I'm simply going to do is make a little bit of a trench here and lightly sprinkle in. Let's just move this guy over here so I don't have to put food right on top of him. And I'm just going to lightly sprinkle in some worm chow. Okay? And that's plenty for a number of reasons. One, I only have 100 worms in here. I don't want to give them a ton of food. Overfeeding is a big problem with worms. It will cause you all sorts of worm bin issues. So it's always better to err on the side of not feeding too much. And then I'm going to just cover it up because the worms prefer to eat in the dark. And also it reduces any chance of unwanted bugs coming in to visit and try to get at the food as well. So there they are. They're all set. I'm going to put the newspaper back on. So they're in the dark when I have the light on in here for other reasons. And I'm going to put the plastic bag container that I cut to fit inside and to retain the moisture. And they're all good to go for 3, 4, 5 days. I'll check in on them again and see how they're doing. So that's it for tonight. Just to summarize, 100 worms in 1 gallon of bedding, or 200 worms in a 12-inch by 12-inch space is the optimal ratio of worms to bedding. It's a good starting point. After you get experience, you can start playing with that, but it's a good, solid place to start. All right, so that's it for tonight. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment. And otherwise, I'm yours in the dirt, Jane. Have a good one.